The kingdom of Vaerith burned silver beneath winter moons. Snow drifted across the palace terraces in soft spirals, while wolves in ceremonial black moved silently through halls of marble and obsidian. Yet high above the celebration, one room remained dark. Lady Isolde Vale stood alone beside an open window overlooking the frozen cliffs. The wind tangled through her pale hair. Below, the kingdom celebrated the ascension of its new Alpha King, Cassian Thorne, her mate, or rather, the wolf fate had once chosen for her. Her fingers tightened slowly against the windowsill as distant cheering rose from the lower courtyards. The sound travelled upward like knives. Tonight should have been her mating ceremony. Instead, it had become his coronation feast. Without her, a knock sounded quietly behind her. Isolde closed her eyes briefly. "Come in." The chamber door opened. Lady Maven entered, carefully carrying folded ceremonial silks draped across her arms. The older woman paused immediately upon seeing Isolde still dressed in plain grey wool. "You haven't changed." Isolde stared out into the storm. "There seems little reason to—" Maven hesitated. Her expression carried the exhausted sorrow of someone who had spent all evening listening to palace rumors spread like disease. "Announced anything publicly?" she said carefully. Isolde laughed once, softly, without humor. "He already did." The older woman said nothing, because they both knew it was true. 3 hours earlier, before the gathered kingdom, Alpha King Cassian Thorne had stood beneath the ancestral banners of House Thorne while nobles filled the grand hall awaiting the formal presentation of his mate. Instead, he denied her, not loudly. That would have been easier. No, Cassian rejected her with royal precision. Cold, measured, absolute. She is unsuitable for the throne. The entire hall had gone silent. Isolde could still hear it, still feel the moment every eye turned toward her. Cassian never once looked at her while speaking. "The kingdom requires strength beside its king," he had continued calmly. "Stability, political unity, an heir worthy of succession." Then finally, he looked directly at her. And destroyed her anyway. The bond was acknowledged in youth. Nothing more, nothing more. The words kept tearing through her chest long after he spoke them, as though the years between them had meant absolutely nothing. Isolde pressed trembling fingers against her throat now. The phantom ache of the broken bond still lingered there beneath her skin, not fully severed. That was the cruelest part. Royal bloodlines carried ancient magic. The bond between an Alpha King and his fated mate could not be entirely destroyed unless one of them died. So instead, the rejection remained half alive, a wound that would never close. A tether burned raw. She could still feel him, still sense the steady pulse of his existence somewhere inside the palace below. And he could feel her too, which meant Cassian knew exactly what he had done to her. Maven stepped closer cautiously. "You should eat something." "I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since yesterday." "I said I'm not hungry." Silence settled heavily between them. Outside, snow battered the cliffs harder. Quietly, "You need to leave the palace." Isolde's gaze shifted slowly toward her. "I know. The court will turn vicious after tonight. They already have." Whispers had followed her through the corridors all evening, weak-blooded, unworthy, the barren daughter of a fallen house. Cassian's advisors had spent years poisoning the court carefully against her, not openly, never directly, just enough to make nobles question whether the future Alpha Queen carried enough strength to stand beside a king born for conquest. And perhaps worst of all, Cassian had allowed it, because kings did not reject their mates publicly without preparation. This had been planned, every moment, every humiliation, every calculated wound. A second knock interrupted the silence. Neither woman moved initially. Then the door opened before permission was granted. A tall wolf entered wearing black military leathers dusted with snow. The room changed instantly, not from fear, from presence. Commander Lucien Vesper carried quiet authority the way some wolves carried weapons, effortlessly and dangerously. He removed his gloves slowly. His silver-grey eyes settled first on Isolde, Then briefly on the untouched ceremonial silks, something unreadable flickered across his expression. "I was told you hadn't left your chambers." Isolde straightened slightly. "And now you've confirmed it?" Lucien closed the door behind him. The storm outside growled softly against the palace towers. Unlike Cassian, Lucien never looked polished. He looked real. Scarred knuckles, wind-burned skin, shoulders heavy from years spent commanding border wars in frozen territories where weaker wolves died quickly. The kingdom adored Cassian. The soldiers trusted Lucien. There was a difference. Maven cleared her throat gently. "I should leave you both." Isolde frowned slightly. "That's unnecessary." But Maven was already moving toward the door, because older wolves noticed things younger wolves often missed. And what flickered silently between Lucien Vesper and the rejected future queen had become increasingly difficult to ignore over the years. The door shut softly behind Maven. Lucien remained standing near the hearth. Neither spoke immediately. At last he said quietly, "You should not stay here tonight." Isolde almost smiled. "Interesting. That's exactly what Maven said. She's right. She usually is." Lucien studied her carefully. "You're bleeding." Isolde looked down. Only then, noticing the faint blood staining her fingertips, where her nails had cut into her palms earlier. She wiped them absently against her skirt. "It doesn't hurt." That was a lie. Everything hurt. The rejection, the bond, the humiliation, the terrible hollow ache of realizing the wolf she had loved since childhood considered her politically disposable. Lucien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He should never have done this publicly. A sharp laugh escaped her. But privately would have been kinder? Yes. The answer startled her. Because he meant it, humanly, or as close to human as wolves ever became. For a long moment the fire crackled softly between them. Then Lucien spoke again. "The southern court arrived tonight." Isolde frowned faintly. "What does that have to do with me? Cassian intends to announce a political engagement soon." Something inside her chest seemed to stop. Not because she was surprised, because hearing it aloud somehow made it real. "Who?" Lucien hesitated only briefly. "Lady Celestine Marrow." "Of course." Beautiful, powerful, daughter of the wealthiest alpha bloodline in the southern kingdoms. The court had wanted Cassian to choose Celestine for years. And now he would, publicly, quickly. Before sympathy for Isolde could become politically inconvenient. The palace suddenly felt unbearably cold. Lucien watched the devastation move silently across her face. His hands curled once at his sides, then relaxed again. "You need to leave before the announcement." Isolde turned back toward the window. Snow swirled violently beyond the cliffs. "Where exactly would I go?" "My estate." The words fell softly, but they changed the room completely. Isolde looked at him sharply. Lucien met her gaze steadily. "My northern territory is isolated. The court rarely travels there. You're offering asylum?" "I'm offering safety." She stared at him. "You barely know me." "That isn't true." The quiet certainty in his voice unsettled her far more than pity would have, because he did know her. Lucien had seen her through years of palace winters, seen her kindness dismissed as weakness, seen her intelligence ignored because she spoke softly instead of loudly, seen her bleed quietly beside a king too ambitious to value gentleness. And somehow, he had remembered. Isolde looked away first. "You shouldn't involve yourself in this. Too late. Cassian is your king." "Yes." The answer came immediately. But after a moment, Lucien added quietly, "He is also my oldest friend." The sadness in those words hurt strangely more than anger would have, because Lucien understood exactly what standing here meant. Treason, perhaps, or at minimum betrayal. Yet he had come anyway. Below the tower, distant music swelled louder as the celebration continued. The kingdom rejoiced for its new Alpha King. Completely unaware their rejected future queen stood upstairs trying not to break apart. Isolde closed her eyes briefly, then whispered the question she had feared asking all evening. Why wasn't I enough? Lucien went still. The fire crackled softly between them. Finally he answered, You were. Her throat tightened painfully. He didn't think so. No, Lucien said quietly. He thought like a king. The distinction mattered, and somehow made everything worse. A long silence followed. Then slowly, very slowly, Lucien removed the heavy black cloak from his shoulders. He stepped forward once and draped it gently around her trembling hands. Warmth settled over her, instantly carrying cedar smoke, snow, steel, and the dangerous steadiness that always seemed to surround him. Not possessive, protective. The sensation nearly undid her. You should rest for a few hours, he said softly. At dawn we leave the capital. Isolde looked up sharply. I'm not sending you north alone during winter. The bond wound beneath her ribs pulsed again painfully at the thought of leaving, of abandoning everything she had spent years believing would one day become her future. Lucien seemed to notice. His expression softened slightly. You do not owe this kingdom your destruction. The words settled somewhere deep inside her chest, somewhere raw, somewhere exhausted. For the first time all night, Isolde finally felt the terrifying edge of something that was not grief, relief, and far below them in the burning heart of the palace. Alpha King Cassian Thorne suddenly froze mid-conversation beneath the chandeliers of the royal hall. Because the damaged mate bond pulsed violently without warning, pain, distance, and another male wolf's scent wrapping around her. Cassian's wineglass cracked instantly in his hand. Blood dripped slowly across his fingers. The entire banquet hall fell silent, but the king barely noticed, because somewhere high above the celebration, for the very first time in his life, he felt her slipping away. Chapter 1. The Road North. By dawn the kingdom had become a rumour behind them. The palace towers of Vayrith disappeared first, then the banners, then the distant silver walls that had dominated the horizon for most of Isolde Vale's life. Snow swallowed everything. The world became white forest, grey sky, and the endless rhythm of hoofbeats cutting through frozen roads. Isolde did not look back, not once, because she knew if she did she might break, and she had already shattered enough for one lifetime. The northern road wound through mountain passes abandoned during winter. Most travellers avoided it. The cold killed carelessness quickly. But Commander Lucien Vesper seemed entirely at home here. His black stallion moved confidently through the snow while he rode slightly ahead, scanning the forest with the constant awareness of a wolf who had spent years surviving border wars. Nothing about him appeared relaxed, not even now. Every movement remained deliberate, measured, prepared, as though danger might emerge from the trees at any moment. Perhaps it often had. They travelled mostly in silence, not uncomfortable silence, merely the silence of two wounded people carrying more thoughts than words. By midday, they stopped beside a frozen stream. Lucien dismounted first. You need food. Isolde nearly smiled. You sound exactly like Maven. Maven is usually right. A familiar answer, simple, practical, and strangely comforting. He built a small fire beneath an overhanging shelf of stone while snow drifted lazily beyond the shelter. Soon the scent of roasting rabbit filled the cold air. Only then did Isolde realize how hungry she truly was. Lucien noticed immediately, of course he did. The man noticed everything. Without comment, he handed her the first portion. She accepted it quietly. For several minutes, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly. Wind moved through distant pines. And for the first time since the rejection ceremony, the knot inside her chest loosened slightly. Not because the pain was gone, because exhaustion finally outweighed it. Tell me something. The words escaped before she fully intended them. Lucien glanced up. What? She stared into the fire. Why did you never marry? The question surprised both of them. A faint smile touched his mouth. That's your first question? It's the first one I thought of. He considered that, then shrugged lightly. No particular reason. That's a terrible answer. It's an honest one. She narrowed her eyes. You're 32, 33, which somehow makes it worse. A genuine laugh escaped him, low, unexpected. The sound transformed his face briefly, made him look younger, less burdened. Isolde found herself staring before quickly looking away. Lucien noticed. He noticed everything, but he spared her embarrassment by answering instead. The border territories require constant attention. That can't be the only reason. No. His gaze drifted toward the forest. Snowflakes settled against dark branches. Then he spoke more quietly. I never met someone I trusted enough. The answer lingered between them, simple, yet somehow revealing far more than intended. Isolde lowered her gaze. Trust. The word felt strangely precious now, like something rare enough to protect. Far away in the capital, trust was currently disintegrating. Alpha King Cassian Thorne stood before the council chamber windows overlooking the city. The celebration had ended hours ago. Most nobles still slept. The kingdom remained unaware that its newly crowned king had spent the entire night pacing his private chambers, restless, irritated, unable to focus, unable to explain why. The broken mate bond continued pulling at him like an invisible wound, faint, persistent, annoying. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt nothing made sense. Your Majesty, the voice interrupted his thoughts. Cassian turned. Lord Adrian Blackmere entered carrying several sealed documents. The king's chief advisor moved with practiced elegance. Every gesture calculated, every word chosen carefully. A useful man, a dangerous one. The northern reports arrived. Cassian accepted the papers absent-mindedly. His attention remained elsewhere. Adrian noticed immediately. As expected, Lady Celestine's family accepted the engagement proposal. Still nothing, no reaction. The advisor frowned slightly. Your Majesty, Cassian finally looked up. What? The engagement. Yes, you seem distracted. A dangerous observation. Most men would never dare say it aloud, but Adrian possessed decades of experience navigating royal tempers. Cassian exhaled sharply. I am fine. The lie sounded hollow even to himself. The advisor remained silent for a moment. Then, is this about Lady Isolde? The room froze. Cassian's expression hardened instantly. No, another lie. Both men knew it. Neither acknowledged it. Adrian placed the documents carefully on the desk. She left before sunrise. The king's jaw tightened. I know. Commander Vesper accompanied her. The room became colder. Something dark flickered briefly behind Cassian's eyes. Gone almost immediately, but present, the advisor noticed, and stored the observation carefully away. Interesting, because for years Cassian Thorne had treated Isolde Vale with polite emotional distance, never cruel, never affectionate, always controlled, always practical. Yet now, after rejecting her, the mere mention of another wolf accompanying her north visibly disturbed him. Curious, very curious indeed. Meanwhile, several hundred miles away, Isolde slept for the first time in nearly 3 days. The storm forced them into an abandoned hunter's cabin shortly before nightfall. Nothing luxurious. 4 walls, a roof, a fireplace, enough. Lucien repaired the broken door while she gathered kindling. Together they transformed the ruined shelter into something almost comfortable. Neither commented on how naturally the cooperation came. Later, after dinner, snow hammered against the windows while firelight painted gold across rough wooden walls. Isolde sat wrapped in blankets near the hearth. Lucien cleaned a hunting knife nearby. The scene felt strangely domestic, dangerously so. You keep staring. His voice startled her. She immediately looked away. I wasn't. You were. I was thinking. About what? Unfortunately, she answered honestly. You don't act like an alpha. Silence. Then, I'm not an alpha. Exactly. His hands paused briefly, then continued cleaning the blade. After several moments, he spoke quietly. My father was alpha. She nodded. Everyone knew that much. Lord Vesper had ruled the northern territories for decades before dying during a border conflict. What happened? Lucien studied the knife. The same thing that always happens, not an answer, yet she waited. Eventually he continued. My younger brother inherited, now she understood. The northern succession laws favored direct bloodline order, even when the older sibling possessed greater capability. Lucien had surrendered leadership, not because he lacked strength, because tradition demanded it. Did you resent him? His expression softened unexpectedly. No. Why not? Because he was good at it. A pause. Then, and because I never wanted a throne. The words settled heavily in the quiet cabin. Isolde stared at the fire, trying to imagine someone willingly rejecting power. The concept felt almost impossible after years inside royal politics. You really mean that? Yes. You could have challenged him. I could have, but didn't know. She looked at him, really looked, and suddenly understood something important. Lucien Vesper carried authority because he never chased it. People trusted him because he valued responsibility more than control. The realization unsettled her unexpectedly, because it forced comparison, and comparison inevitably led back to Cassian. Pain flickered through the damaged mate bond again. Sharp, brief, gone. Isolde flinched. Lucien noticed instantly. The knife lowered. Is it getting worse? She hesitated, then nodded. A little. Concern darkened his expression. The bond injuries should have weakened by now. Instead they seemed increasingly unstable, almost reactive, as though distance somehow aggravated rather than soothed them. Strange. Very strange. Far away, Cassian abruptly woke from sleep. Breathing hard, heart racing, the room stood dark around him. Empty, cold. He pressed a hand against his chest. The sensation vanished almost immediately, leaving only irritation behind. Yet he remained awake long afterward, staring into darkness, unable to shake the inexplicable feeling that something important was moving further away with every passing hour. 3 days later they reached the north. As they approached, wolves emerged from the manor entrance. Servants, guards, stable workers, families, children not fearful, happy, genuinely happy to see him. The welcome felt startlingly sincere. One little girl immediately launched herself at Lucien's horse. You're late, Lucien laughed, actually laughed, and lifted her effortlessly into his arms. I know. You missed midwinter. I know. You owe me 3 stories. 3 seems excessive. 5 then. The child considered this. Acceptable. Isolde stared, utterly bewildered. The fearsome border commander apparently negotiated with 6-year-olds. Who knew? Lucien finally noticed her expression. A faint smile appeared. Lady Isolde. For a brief moment, curious green eyes widened. Who's that? The commander looked toward Isolde. For a brief moment something unspoken passed across his face. Then he answered softly, A friend. The word struck her strangely hard, because after everything that happened, friend felt like the safest thing anyone had called her in a very long time. And for the first time since her world shattered. Isolde stepped forward, toward the uncertain beginning of something entirely new. Chapter 2. The House That Learned Her Name. For the first week, Isolde expected someone to ask her when she was leaving. No one did. Not Lucien, not the household staff, not the guards stationed around the estate. No one treated her like a burden. No one treated her like a guest either, which somehow felt even stranger. They simply treated her as though she belonged there. Not because she had earned it, not because she carried a title, because Lucien had brought her home. And that seemed explanation enough for everyone. The realization unsettled her. In the royal palace, belonging had always been conditional. Everything came with requirements: status, bloodline, influence, political usefulness. Nothing was freely given. Yet here in the north, wolves seemed to operate by entirely different laws. 3 mornings after her arrival, Isolde wandered into the manor kitchens before sunrise. The room was already alive. Bread baked inside enormous stone ovens. Steam rose from iron pots. Cook fires crackled beneath hanging kettles. Half a dozen workers moved through the organized chaos with practiced efficiency. The scent reminded her unexpectedly of childhood. Before court politics, before mate bonds, before heartbreak, before everything. An older woman glanced up from kneading dough, then immediately smiled. "You're awake early," Isolde blinked. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "Nonsense." The woman wiped flour from her hands and pointed toward a nearby table. "Sit." The command carried the effortless authority of someone who ruled kitchens and expected obedience. Oddly enough, Isolde obeyed. Within minutes a steaming mug appeared before her. Honey tea, fresh bread, butter. The older woman resumed working. For several moments neither spoke. Then, "Commander says you like cinnamon." Isolde looked up. The woman nodded toward a plate beside her. Fresh pastries dusted lightly with cinnamon sugar, still warm. Something inside her chest squeezed painfully. Not from sadness. From shock, because she couldn't remember the last time someone had noticed something so small, something so unimportant, and remembered it. "Thank you," the woman smiled. "You're welcome." A pause. Then, "I'm Edith, Isolde." Edith snorted softly. "We know." The answer startled a laugh out of her. A real one, unplanned. The kitchen immediately grew quieter. Several workers glanced over, not because she had done anything strange, because it was apparently the first time anyone there had heard her laugh. The sound lingered long after breakfast ended. Outside, winter sunlight spilled across frozen fields. The Vesper estate sat near the edge of a sprawling valley surrounded by dark forests and distant mountains. Beautiful, untamed, alive. Everywhere she looked, wolves worked, repairing fences, training horses, hauling supplies, preparing for spring. The estate functioned less like a noble residence and more like a small village. Everyone contributed, everyone mattered. No one understood that better than Lucien. Isolde discovered this accidentally later that afternoon. She had been exploring the grounds when shouting erupted near the eastern stables. Instinct immediately sent her toward the noise. Years inside palace politics had taught her that shouting usually meant trouble, sometimes danger. She arrived to find 3 stable workers surrounding an injured horse. The animal kicked wildly, panicked, bleeding. One young handler looked moments away from being trampled. Then Lucien appeared, simply appearing where he was needed. The effect was immediate. The workers relaxed visibly, the frightened horse gradually settled. Even the atmosphere changed. Lucien approached slowly, speaking softly, calmly. The horse's breathing steadied, its trembling eased. Within minutes he was kneeling beside the injured leg, examining the wound. Isolde watched from a distance. Something warm and unfamiliar stirred inside her chest. Admiration, perhaps. Not because he solved the problem, because everyone trusted him to. There was a difference, a profound one. Most powerful wolves demanded loyalty. Lucien earned it. That evening she found herself thinking about him far more than she intended, which was dangerous, very dangerous, because she was still broken, still carrying the remnants of a mate bond that refused to die, still healing from wounds far deeper than rejection. The last thing she needed was emotional confusion. Unfortunately, fate appeared uninterested in what she needed. A week later, the first letter arrived from the capital. Lucien was absent when it came, inspecting northern patrol routes near the border. The messenger delivered the royal correspondence directly to the manor. Addressed to Lady Isolde Vale, former future queen, former mate, former everything. Her hands shook before she even opened it, not because she expected kindness, because she expected pain, and Cassian had become very efficient at providing that. The seal broke. She unfolded the parchment. Read 3 lines, then stopped breathing. Lady Isolde, His Majesty Alpha King Cassian Thorne requests your attendance at the formal engagement celebration between the Crown and Lady Celestine Marrow to be held during the first moon of spring. Your presence would be appreciated. No acknowledgement of what he had done, only an invitation, as though she were some distant noble acquaintance. Not the woman whose life he had publicly destroyed. The letter slipped from her fingers. landing silently on the floor. For several moments she simply stood there, unable to move, unable to think, unable to process the sheer cruelty hidden beneath such polite wording. Because this wasn't an invitation, it was a message, a reminder, a final humiliation carefully disguised as etiquette. He wanted her to watch. Something inside her finally cracked. Hours later, Lucien found her sitting alone beside the frozen lake. Snow drifted softly around her. The unopened cloak around her shoulders carried traces of cedar and winter. The royal letter rested crumpled beside her. Lucien read it once, only once, then folded it carefully, very carefully. The controlled motion somehow looked far more dangerous than anger. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "You're not going. Simple, certain, absolute." Isolde laughed bitterly. "That isn't your decision." "No." His gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains. "It's yours." The distinction mattered. Again, he always seemed to understand that. She stared out across the frozen lake. "I loved him." The confession emerged quietly, rawly, without defense. Lucien remained silent, listening. "I spent years convincing myself that if I worked harder, became better, proved myself." Her voice faltered. The wind carried the rest away. "He was supposed to be my future." The words hurt even now. Perhaps they always would. Lucien looked toward her then. His expression carried no pity, only understanding, and somehow that felt infinitely kinder. "Isolde," she lifted her eyes. "If someone must become smaller for love to survive," his voice remained soft, steady, dangerously sincere. "That isn't love." The world seemed to stop, just for a moment, because no one had ever said that to her before, not once, not in all the years she spent sacrificing pieces of herself to fit beside a king. The silence stretched between them, filled with something gentler, something patient, something healing. Neither noticed how close they sat now, or perhaps both noticed and chose not to acknowledge it. Far away in the capital, Alpha King Cassian Thorne stood before a ballroom crowded with nobles. Musicians played guests, laughed, preparations for the engagement celebration continued. Everything proceeded exactly according to plan, exactly as it should. Yet the king remained restless, increasingly so, because every night the damaged mate bond pulsed stronger. And tonight, for the first time, he swore he could feel her laughing. The sensation hit him like a blade, brief, impossible, gone. But the damage lingered. Cassian stared out across the ballroom, suddenly unable to enjoy any of it. The music, the celebration, the future he fought so hard to secure, because somewhere far to the north, the woman he rejected was slowly learning how to live without him, and for reasons he could not understand. That realization terrified him. As snow fell softly across the northern valley, Isolde remained beside the frozen lake, watching moonlight dance across silver ice, listening to Lucien's quiet presence beside her. And for the first time since her heart broke, the future no longer looked entirely dark. Chapter 3. The Wolves Who Chose Her First. The North measured worth differently. It took Isolde several weeks to understand that. In the capital, a person's value had always been attached to things that could be counted. Titles, land, political influence, marriage alliances, bloodlines. Every interaction carried invisible calculations beneath it. Every smile had purpose. Every kindness expected repayment. The northern territories seemed almost absurd by comparison. Nobody cared how many noble ancestors a person possessed if they couldn't survive winter. Nobody admired expensive clothing more than a warm fire. Nobody respected speeches more than action. It was a world built on necessity, and perhaps because of that it was honest. For the first time in years, Isolde found herself breathing without constantly preparing for judgment. Not entirely. The old wounds remained, but they no longer consumed every waking thought. That alone felt miraculous. The morning began quietly. Snow drifted beyond the manor windows, while pale sunlight filtered across the breakfast hall. Lucien had already departed before dawn, A border dispute required his attention. The household moved through its usual routines. Workers came and went. Children ran through corridors despite repeated instructions not to. Life continued. Simple, steady, real. Isolde found herself increasingly drawn to that steadiness, especially when the alternative was dwelling on memories. She was carrying a basket of folded linens toward the western wing when a small figure collided with her knees. A startled gasp escaped both of them. The basket nearly toppled. Tiny hands shot upward. "Sorry!" Isolde looked down. Anwen stared back with wide green eyes. The child looked genuinely horrified by the near collision. A lock of dark hair had escaped her braid. Her cheeks glowed pink from running. "What emergency requires this much speed?" Isolde asked. Anwen blinked, then considered the question very seriously. "I forgot." A laugh escaped before Isolde could stop it. The child's expression brightened immediately. Success. Apparently making adults laugh ranked among Anwen's favorite achievements. "You forgot?" "It was important when I started running." "And now?" Anwen frowned. "Now I only remember being hungry. An understandable tragedy." The little girl nodded solemnly. "Exactly." By then several passing servants were openly smiling. Anwen seemed completely unaware of her own charm, or perhaps fully aware. With children, it was often difficult to tell. The girl walked beside Isolde toward the kitchens, not invited, simply joining her as though the arrangement had already been agreed upon halfway there. Anwen slipped her small hand into Isolde's. The gesture happened so naturally that neither mentioned it. Yet something inside Isolde tightened unexpectedly, because trust from adults was one thing. Trust from children felt entirely different. Children had fewer reasons to lie, far fewer reasons to pretend affection. Anwen liked her. The realization carried surprising weight. The kitchens were warm. Edith immediately handed Anwen a biscuit before the child could begin negotiating for one. Years of experience, clearly. Anwen accepted the biscuit with the satisfaction of someone winning a difficult legal battle, then settled beside Isolde at one of the tables. For several minutes they ate quietly. Eventually, Anwen spoke. "Will Commander Lucien be back tonight?" "Probably." The child nodded. "Good. Why?" "Because he forgets to eat when he's working." Isolde paused. That sounded alarmingly plausible. Anwen continued chewing thoughtfully. "Last winter he worked for 2 days and only ate once." "How do you know that?" "I counted." The answer carried the certainty of detailed research. Edith snorted from across the room. "She's not exaggerating. Wonderful. Apparently the commander of the Northern Territories required monitoring by children." Isolde made a mental note. Someone clearly needed to intervene. Later. Not now. The day unfolded peacefully, and without realizing it, Isolde gradually became useful. It started with small things. An elderly stable worker struggling to organize winter supply records. A young servant trying unsuccessfully to write a letter to distant relatives. 2 children arguing over arithmetic. Simple problems, simple solutions. Isolde helped. Not because anyone asked. Because she could. By afternoon she had somehow become involved in half a dozen different tasks. The Northern Estate operated on cooperation. Once someone demonstrated competence, people naturally included them. The concept remained strangely refreshing. Near sunset, she discovered a far more serious problem. The village bakery. The building sat near the lower edge of the estate settlement. Small, warm, usually crowded. Today it was nearly empty. The reason became obvious within moments. The baker's wife was crying. Her husband lay feverish upstairs. Their apprentice had injured his hand, and an important winter gathering was scheduled for the following evening. Hundreds of people expected food. The baker couldn't stand. The apprentice couldn't knead dough. Panic hung thick in the air. Isolde listened quietly, then rolled up her sleeves. The baker's wife stared. "What are you doing?" "Making bread." The woman blinked. "Can you?" A faint smile touched Isolde's mouth. "My mother would haunt me if I couldn't." 3 hours later the bakery smelled alive again. Flour dusted every surface. The ovens blazed. Dough rose beneath warm cloths, And for the first time all day, the baker's wife looked hopeful. Word travelled faster than snowstorms in small communities. By evening, several villagers had arrived to help. One chopped wood, another carried water. Someone repaired a damaged oven shelf. Nobody demanded payment. Nobody asked whether assisting benefited them personally. They simply helped. Because one of their own needed help. Because tomorrow's gathering mattered. Because that was what people did here. Isolde worked until her arms ached pleasantly. It felt good. Honest work often did. For a few precious hours she forgot entirely about mate bonds and kings. Forgot palace corridors. Forgot humiliation. Forgot the life she lost. She became only a woman making bread. And somehow that version of herself felt more real than any title ever had. Night had fully fallen by the time Lucien returned. Snow clung to his cloak. Exhaustion shadowed his features. The border meeting had clearly gone poorly. Yet the moment he entered the village square, he stopped. The scent hit him first. Fresh bread, hundreds of loaves, warm spices, honey. The entire settlement smelled like a festival. Confusion crossed his face. One of the guards noticed immediately. "Lady Isolde." Lucien looked toward the bakery, then followed the scent. The sight waiting inside momentarily silenced him. Flour covered nearly every available surface. Children carried baskets. Villagers laughed. The baker's wife looked ready to cry from relief. And standing at the center of it all, Isolde. Her sleeves rolled, hair escaping its pins, a streak of flour across one cheek. Completely unaware she was being watched. She was smiling. The expression transformed her. Lucien had spent years seeing her inside palace walls, graceful, composed, controlled, beautiful. But this was different. This was happiness. And somehow it was infinitely more dangerous, because he suddenly realized he would do almost anything to keep that smile from disappearing. The thought arrived uninvited, powerful, terrifying. He immediately looked away. Unfortunately, his wolf did not. His wolf noticed everything. The warmth, the laughter, the way people naturally gathered around her, the way children followed her, the way she made an entire room brighter simply by existing inside it. Troubling observations, very troubling. A small voice interrupted his thoughts. "Commander." Anwen appeared beside him. Lucien looked down. The child folded her arms. "You forgot lunch." Apparently the surveillance continued. "I was busy. You always say that, because it's usually true." Anwen narrowed her eyes, then pointed toward the bakery. Lady Isolde remembered. Lucien glanced back toward the crowded room. Something softened inside his chest. Yes, she probably would remember. That was precisely the problem. Because every day she spent here made leaving less imaginable, and every day made forgetting her more impossible. Inside the bakery, Isolde finally noticed him. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment neither looked away. Something passed between them. Quiet, unspoken, dangerously gentle. Then Anwen ruined the moment completely, as children often did. The little girl ran into the bakery and loudly announced, "Commander Lucien forgot to eat again." The entire room turned toward him. Silence. Then laughter erupted from every corner. Even Isolde laughed. Lucien considered retreating back into the snow. Unfortunately, his reputation would never recover. Not after this, especially not when Isolde stepped forward holding a loaf of fresh bread, her eyes bright with amusement. "Then I suppose you'll have to stay for dinner." The invitation sounded simple, ordinary. Yet something about it settled deep inside him, like warmth after a long winter ride, like home, and for reasons neither fully understood yet, both of them felt it. The beginning of something neither fate nor kings had planned, something chosen, and sometimes chosen things became stronger than destiny itself. Far away in the capital, Alpha King Cassian Thorne stood before a ballroom full of nobles. Music played. Wine flowed. Preparations for his engagement celebration continued. Everything proceeded perfectly. Yet unease lingered beneath his skin, persistent, growing, unwelcome. That night he dreamed of snow, of laughter, of a woman smiling somewhere beyond his reach. And when he woke before dawn, the emptiness waiting beside him felt larger than it had the day before, though he would never admit it aloud. Not yet. Not while pride remained stronger than regret. But regret was coming, slowly, relentlessly, like winter. And winter always arrived eventually. Chapter 4. The Child Who Wouldn't Let Her Leave. The first time Anwen fell asleep outside Isolde's room, nobody noticed until morning. A maid carrying fresh linens nearly dropped the entire basket when she discovered a small sleeping figure curled beside the door. Word travelled quickly through the manor. By the time Isolde opened her door, half the household seemed aware that Anwen had apparently decided the hallway was now an acceptable bedroom. The little girl lay wrapped in a blanket cocoon, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. For one alarming moment, Isolde feared something had happened. Then Anwen yawned, stretched, and blinked sleepily up at her. "Good morning." Isolde stared. "Anwen?" "Yes? What are you doing out here?" The child looked around as though seeing the corridor for the first time. Then she answered with complete sincerity. "Sleeping." A nearby maid immediately turned away to hide a laugh. Isolde pressed her lips together. "That much is obvious." Anwen sat up slowly. "I was conducting an experiment." "Oh? Yes. What kind of experiment?" The little girl considered her answer carefully. "To see whether hallways are colder than bedrooms, and they are." "That sounds like information you could have discovered without sleeping on the floor." "Probably." The answer was so earnest that even Isolde couldn't suppress a smile. Anwen brightened immediately. The expression transformed, her entire face, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Over breakfast, the child developed increasingly elaborate explanations involving imaginary monsters, suspicious drafts, and an urgent need to remain close to the guest wing. Nobody believed a word of it. Least of all Lucien, who listened to the story while drinking coffee and somehow maintained a perfectly serious expression. When Anwen finally finished, he nodded once. A compelling argument. The little girl looked pleased. Then Lucien added, "You're still sleeping in your own room tonight." Anwen sighed heavily, clearly betrayed. The manor laughed. And just like that, another morning unfolded in the north. Life there seemed built from moments like these. Small moments, simple moments, the kind that never appeared in songs or royal histories, yet somehow mattered more. Weeks passed. The deep winter settled fully across the territory. Snow-buried fences, ice coated the lakes. The forests became silent beneath white blankets stretching endlessly toward distant mountains. The northern wolves adapted as they always had. Work continued. Children played. Families gathered near fires. The season was difficult, but difficulty had never frightened people who lived here. Neither, increasingly, did Isolde. Without realizing it, she began becoming part of the estate itself. People sought her company naturally. The stable workers waved when she crossed the courtyard. The kitchen staff saved her favorite pastries before breakfast ended. Children waited for her after lessons. Even the elderly wolves who spent evenings near the great hall hearth would shift their chairs to make room whenever she approached. The acceptance arrived so gradually she barely noticed it. Then one evening she did. She stood in the village square watching snowfall drift through lantern light while families crossed the packed roads carrying supplies and firewood. Laughter echoed from nearby houses. Warm light glowed behind frosted windows, and for the first time since leaving the capital, nobody was looking at her with pity. Later that evening, Lucien returned from patrol. Snow dusted his shoulders, exhaustion lingered around his eyes, yet the moment he entered the library, something in his expression eased. Anwen had fallen asleep halfway through a story. A book rested open on her chest. Isolde sat nearby, mending a tear in one of the household cloaks. The fire burned low. The room glowed gold. The scene looked remarkably ordinary, and perhaps that was why it affected him. For years he had returned to this manor after difficult journeys. It had always been home. Yet lately something felt different. Warmer. as though a missing piece had quietly found its place. "You keep staring." The words startled him. Isolde never looked up from her sewing. A smile tugged faintly at her mouth. Lucien felt unusually caught. "She's going to fall. That's not why you're staring. Dangerous woman. Far too observant." He crossed the room before she could continue, carefully lifting Anwen into his arms. The child immediately curled closer without waking, trusting him completely. Watching the gesture stirred something unexpected inside Isolde. A warmth, a tenderness. The image lingered long after he carried the little girl upstairs. When Lucien returned, the library felt quieter. The fire crackled softly. Snow tapped against the windows. Neither seemed eager to leave. Eventually, he settled into a chair opposite her. Silence stretched comfortably between them. A strange thing. Months ago, silence would have felt awkward. Now it felt natural. The realization unsettled them both. "Do you miss it?" The question arrived gently. He didn't need to explain. The palace, the crown, the future she had lost. Isolde lowered the cloak into her lap. For a long moment she simply thought, "I miss who I believed I was going to become." Lucien listened carefully, not interrupting, not offering immediate comfort. "I spent years imagining a future," she continued quietly. "Not because I wanted power, because I thought it mattered. I thought I was building something. You were—" She looked up. He held her gaze steadily. "You just weren't building it with the right people." The words struck harder than she expected, perhaps because they carried no judgment, only truth, a truth she wasn't entirely ready to accept. Yet part of her wanted to. Part of her desperately wanted to. A week later, winter delivered its first true storm, the kind northern wolves respected, the kind that erased roads and buried entire landscapes beneath white fury. Visibility vanished. Travel stopped. The estate sealed itself against the weather. For 2 days, snow battered the manor relentlessly. Children remained indoors. Workers rotated firewood duties. Families gathered together, waiting for the storm to pass. Then Anwen developed a fever. Nothing severe, nothing unusual. Yet the effect on the household was immediate. The little girl was beloved. Everyone worried. Especially Isolde. She remained beside Anwen's bed for most of the following day. By midnight, moonlight filtered through the curtains. The storm had finally begun weakening. Anwen stirred beneath her blankets. Opening sleepy green eyes, "You stayed." The words were barely louder than a whisper. "Of course." The child looked at her for a long moment, then asked the question that changed everything. "Why?" Isolde brushed damp hair gently from her forehead. "Because I care about you." The answer seemed simple, yet Anwen went very still. After several seconds, she looked away. "My mother used to say that—" Pain flashed through Isolde's chest. Not her own pain. Anwen's. The quiet ache children carried long after loss. The room fell silent. Only the distant wind remained. Then Anwen looked back, eyes shining slightly, voice trembling. "If you leave someday—" The words faltered. She swallowed hard. "Will you tell me first?" Everything inside Isolde broke, because beneath the question lived a deeper fear, the fear every abandoned child carried. "Will I matter enough for goodbye?" Tears burned unexpectedly behind her eyes. She reached for Anwen's hand, holding it gently protectively, and answered with complete certainty. "Yes." The little girl relaxed immediately, trusting her, believing her. Within minutes she drifted back to sleep, peaceful once more. But Isolde remained awake long afterward, watching moonlight spill across the room, listening to the fading storm. Feeling the weight of that promise settle deep inside her heart. For the first time since arriving in the north, she understood something important. She wasn't simply recovering here anymore. She was creating roots, building connections, becoming part of something larger than herself, and perhaps that was more frightening than heartbreak had ever been, because now there were people she loved. People who could be hurt, people she could lose. Far to the south, preparations for Alpha King Cassian Thorne's engagement celebration continued. Invitations crossed kingdoms, nobles gathered, jewels were displayed, musicians rehearsed. Everything moved toward a future he had chosen. Yet each night his sleep grew worse. His dreams grew stranger, and an emptiness he could neither name nor escape followed him through every waking hour. Winter was changing all of them. Some toward healing, others toward regret. Neither path could be stopped now. Chapter 5. The engagement that should have made him happy. The first sign that something was wrong came from a horse. Cassian stood in the royal stables 3 weeks before his engagement ceremony, watching a black warhorse refuse to approach him. The stallion had never behaved that way before. For years the animal had carried him into battle without hesitation. Now it pinned its ears back and shifted uneasily whenever he came near. The stable master looked confused. Cassian felt irritated. The horse looked almost wary, as though sensing something unsettled beneath the king's skin. Perhaps it did. Animals often notice truths people prefer to ignore. Unfortunately, Cassian had become increasingly skilled at ignoring truths. The problem was that they rarely disappeared. They simply waited and eventually demanded attention. The engagement celebration approached rapidly. The palace transformed itself around the event. Tailors rushed through corridors carrying expensive fabric. Florists arrived daily. Servants polished every visible surface until the marble floors reflected chandeliers like still water. Everything appeared perfect. Everything should have felt perfect. Yet Cassian found himself walking through preparations with a strange sense of distance, as though observing someone else's future. Every detail had been carefully planned. The alliance with House Marrow would strengthen trade routes, increase military support, stabilize several disputed territories. The match made political sense. The kingdom approved, the council approved, his advisors approved, even Celestine approved. Most importantly, for years Cassian had approved. So why did everything feel wrong? He stood before a balcony window overlooking the capital. Snow still covered portions of the city below. Though spring slowly approached, winter remained reluctant to surrender. The sight stirred an unexpected memory. A girl standing beside another window years earlier, laughing softly at something he could no longer remember. The memory arrived suddenly, uninvited, sharp. Cassian frowned. Why had he thought of that? Why now? A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. The door opened. Celestine Marrow stepped inside. She looked exactly as the kingdom expected its future queen to look. Elegant, beautiful, perfectly composed. Nothing about her appeared out of place. She carried herself with confidence born from generations of power. Any king should have been proud to stand beside her. Cassian certainly had been. Once. Now he simply felt tired. Celestine approached the desk. "I've been looking for you." He nodded. "You found me. An impressive achievement considering you've been avoiding everyone all week." The observation landed more accurately than he liked. Cassian returned his attention to the documents before him. "What do you need?" A brief silence followed. Then, "That's an interesting question." He looked up. Celestine watched him carefully, far more carefully than most people did. Perhaps because she had spent years navigating powerful wolves. Perhaps because she understood political masks better than anyone. "What should I have asked?" he said. Her expression remained calm. Most future husbands begin with hello. The words carried no anger, which somehow made them worse. Cassian exhaled slowly. "Hello, Celestine. There he is." She settled into the chair opposite him. For several moments neither spoke. Then she surprised him. "Do you regret it?" The room seemed to still. Cassian's eyes narrowed. "Regret what?" "Her." The single word landed like a blade direct clean, impossible to misunderstand. Cassian immediately looked away. A mistake, Celestine noticed. Of course she did. For years the court underestimated her because she smiled easily. A dangerous error. The future queen missed very little. "I see." His jaw tightened. "You see nothing." "I see enough." Silence stretched. Then she leaned back slightly. "You know what's interesting?" Cassian said nothing. Celestine continued anyway. "I spent years believing Lady Isolde would become queen." A pause. "When you rejected her, I expected relief." Her eyes remained fixed on him. I wasn't relieved. Something cold settled in his chest. "Why are we discussing this?" "Because you look miserable." The bluntness startled him. Celestine rarely spoke without careful calculation. This sounded almost honest. People become miserable for many reasons. Not usually 3 weeks before their engagement. The truth hovered between them. Uncomfortable, persistent. Neither wanted to touch it, yet neither could fully ignore it. Finally Celestine stood, smoothing her skirts. "Whether you regret it or not no longer matters." Cassian remained silent. She paused near the door, then added quietly, "Just make sure you're mourning the right thing." The door closed behind her, leaving him alone, and somehow feeling even less certain than before. Far to the north, certainty arrived in a much different form. It arrived as a loaf of bread, specifically a burnt loaf. Isolde stared at it in disbelief. The kitchen erupted into laughter. Even Edith looked delighted. "I thought you were supposed to be talented." "I am talented. Apparently not today." The evidence sat directly between them, blackened, ruined, entirely inedible. Anwen nearly fell off her chair laughing. For several minutes nobody accomplished anything productive. The disaster became household entertainment. By evening, 3 separate versions of the story were circulating through the estate. In one version, the bread had exploded. In another, it had somehow attacked Isolde personally. Children were already exaggerating details, a dangerous sign. The truth remained simple. She had become distracted. Unfortunately, the distraction possessed grey eyes and a habit of appearing unexpectedly. Lucien entered the kitchen carrying patrol reports, immediately noticed the ruined loaf, then made the fatal mistake of smiling. Anwen pointed dramatically. "She burned it. Clearly. I've never seen bread that black, neither have I." Isolde narrowed her eyes. Traitors, every one of them. Lucien accepted a cup of coffee from Edith. Still smiling, the expression transformed him. It always did. Most outsiders saw only the commander, the warrior, the dangerous northern wolf. Few people saw moments like this. The softer edges, the humanity beneath the armor. Isolde found herself noticing those moments more frequently, far more frequently than was safe. That realization followed her long after the kitchen emptied, long after dinner ended, long after the estate settled into evening quiet, because the truth had become increasingly difficult to deny. She liked him, not as a friend, not merely as a protector, as a man. The realization should have brought guilt. Instead, it brought fear, because liking Lucien felt dangerously close to wanting something again, and wanting things had never ended well for her. The following morning, a messenger arrived from the capital. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Royal correspondence rarely carried good news, especially not lately. The sealed letter bore the king's crest. Lucien received it personally. His expression darkened the moment he finished reading. Isolde noticed. "What's happened?" For a moment he hesitated, then handed her the parchment. She read quickly. The words blurred, then sharpened, then hurt. Alpha King Cassian Thorne formally requests the attendance of Commander Lucien Vesper and Lady Isolde Vale at the spring engagement celebration. The invitation contained all the expected royal courtesies, all the expected politeness, which somehow made it crueler. The message beneath the words felt obvious. "Come witness the future that replaced you." Isolde lowered the letter slowly. The old wound stirred immediately. Not as violently as before, but enough to remind her it still existed. Lucien watched her carefully. "You don't have to go." "No." Her voice sounded distant. "I don't." A long silence followed. Then Anwen appeared from nowhere, as children often did. The little girl climbed directly into Isolde's lap, examined the letter upside down, then frowned. "I don't like him." Both adults blinked. "Anwen," Lucien said carefully. "What? You've never met him?" "I still don't like him." The certainty in her voice nearly broke the tension. Almost. Isolde hugged the child closer. For reasons she couldn't explain, tears suddenly threatened. Not because of the invitation, because someone had chosen her side without conditions, without politics, without expectation, simply because they loved her. The realization hit harder than the letter ever could. Outside, snow continued melting across the northern valleys. Spring approached, slowly, relentlessly, and with it came change. Some changes would heal, others would destroy. None of them were ready for what was coming. Because the invitation wasn't truly about an engagement. It was the first move in a much larger game, one that had already begun unfolding behind palace walls. And before it ended, kingdoms would shake, secrets would surface, hearts would break, and the woman once dismissed as unworthy would become the center of everything. Chapter 6. The wolves who remembered her worth. The invitation remained on Lucien's desk for 3 days. Neither of them mentioned it. The woman who arrived in the north had been surviving. This version of herself was beginning to live. The realization brought both comfort and fear, because happiness always felt dangerous when one had lost it before. That afternoon, Lucien returned from patrol earlier than expected. The moment he entered the courtyard, several children ran toward him. Anwen reached him first. Naturally, she launched herself at his legs with enough force to nearly knock him off balance. "You're back." "So I am." "You missed everything." "That sounds serious." It was. The child immediately began explaining a series of events involving mud, a goat, 2 arguments, and a suspiciously broken wheelbarrow. By the end of the story, even Lucien looked confused. Isolde watched from nearby, smiling despite herself. He looked different here. The commander carried responsibility everywhere, yet among his people there existed moments when the burden slipped, moments when he seemed less like a soldier and more like a man. Those moments had become increasingly difficult to ignore. Unfortunately, Lucien was having similar problems, because every day seemed to offer a new reason to notice her. The way workers sought her advice, the way children gravitated toward her, the way she remembered details most people forgot, the way she quietly improved lives without asking for recognition. The problem wasn't that he admired her. That ship had sailed months ago. The problem was that admiration had become something deeper, something far more dangerous. And Lucien Vesper knew exactly how dangerous it was, because he remembered the first time he met her, years earlier, long before the rejection, long before exile, long before any of this. She had been 17, standing alone during a royal gathering while dozens of nobles competed desperately for attention. Most people watched Cassian. Lucien noticed the girl standing quietly near a window, helping an elderly servant collect dropped papers. Nobody else had seen it. Nobody else had cared. Yet somehow that small moment remained vivid even now. Years later, that should have told him something. Instead, he had ignored it, for a very long time, perhaps too long. The trouble with disciplined men was that they often became experts at denying themselves things. Eventually, the habit became instinct. That evening, the household gathered for dinner. The dining hall buzzed with conversation. Spring always improved spirits. Winter survival was behind them. War remained distant. The future looked promising. For most people, not all. Near the end of the meal, a rider arrived from the southern border. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Messengers rarely traveled at such speed without reason. The man looked exhausted, his horse worse. Lucien met him privately, but news traveled quickly, especially in close communities. Within an hour, whispers moved through the manor. By midnight, everyone knew something had happened in the capital. The details remained unclear. Only fragments existed. Political tensions, council disagreements, unexpected delays surrounding the engagement ceremony, rumors, nothing concrete. Yet the uncertainty lingered. The following morning, Lucien finally received the full report, and immediately wished he hadn't. He found Isolde in the library. Anwen sat nearby, building an elaborate fortress from books despite repeated instructions not to. The structure appeared moments from collapse. The child seemed proud of this. Lucien held the report loosely. His expression alone made Isolde sit straighter. What happened? He hesitated, not because he wanted to hide the truth, because he disliked delivering pain, especially to her. The engagement celebration has been postponed. Silence. Anwen looked up. Isolde blinked. Postponed. Indefinitely. The room became still. A strange answer. Royal engagements weren't postponed indefinitely. They happened. Or they ended. There was rarely a middle ground. Why? Lucien exhaled slowly. The official explanation cites political complications. And the unofficial one? His gaze met hers. The king collapsed during a council session. Shock rippled through the room. Even Anwen stopped stacking books. What? The healers can't find a cause. For several moments nobody spoke. The information felt unreal. Cassian wasn't weak. He wasn't fragile. The idea of him collapsing seemed impossible. And yet, a cold sensation moved through Isolde's chest. The mate bond. For the first time in weeks she felt it clearly. Distress. The sensation vanished almost immediately, leaving confusion behind. Lucien noticed her expression. The understanding that crossed his face was immediate. The bond. They were both thinking about it. Neither wanted to say so. Not in front of Anwen. Not yet. That evening, after the child finally fell asleep, they met in the study. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Spring storms had replaced winter snow. The change felt symbolic somehow. A season ending. Another beginning. I felt it. The confession came quietly. Lucien nodded. I assumed you might. Isolde moved toward the fireplace. The warmth felt comforting, necessary. He rejected me. Her voice remained steady. So why does the bond still react? A difficult question. One neither fully understood. Ancient mate bonds rarely behaved predictably. Royal bloodlines complicated things further. Legends existed, stories, warnings. Most were centuries old. Few remained well documented. Lucien stared into the fire. Maybe it never broke properly. The possibility hung heavily between them. Neither liked it for different reasons. Isolde because it meant she wasn't entirely free. Lucien because it meant Cassian still occupied a space in her life he could never touch. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the valley. Spring storms carried a different energy than winter blizzards. Less brutal, more restless. Like something awakening. Eventually Isolde spoke again. If he asked me to return. The question remained unfinished. Lucien's entire body went still, not visibly. Most people wouldn't notice. She did. The realization startled her, because she knew exactly how he was waiting for the answer. The awareness changed everything. Neither acknowledged it, yet suddenly it existed between them. Real, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Isolde looked down at her hands, then answered honestly, I don't think I could. The words left her trembling slightly, not because she doubted them, because she didn't. For months she had believed her greatest weakness was loving Cassian. Now she understood something deeper. Her greatest strength had been surviving him. Lucien released a breath so quietly she almost missed it. Almost. The fire crackled softly. Rain continued beyond the windows, and for a brief moment neither looked away. The silence stretched. Far to the south, Alpha King Cassian Thorne stood alone on a palace balcony. The healers had ordered rest. He ignored them. The council demanded explanations. He had none. The truth remained simple. Every day felt harder. Every night felt worse. The kingdom believed stress caused it. Exhaustion, political pressure. Nobody knew that some nights he woke convinced he had forgotten something vital, someone vital. A terrible absence haunted him. And no matter how desperately he searched for its source, he always found himself thinking of the same pair of silver-grey eyes, the same quiet voice, the same woman walking away into the snow. For the first time in his life, Alpha King Cassian Thorne was beginning to understand loss. Unfortunately for him. Understanding had arrived far too late. Chapter 7. The Offer That Broke Them Both. The days following news of Cassian's collapse felt strangely unsettled. Not because she wanted to return to him. She didn't. That realization had become increasingly clear. What unsettled her was the bond itself. Occasionally she felt it now, brief flashes, emotions she couldn't entirely identify, frustration, restlessness, pain, then silence again. The connection behaved like a wound refusing to close. Lucien noticed the change immediately. Of course he did. He noticed everything. The problem was that neither of them knew what to do about it. So they did what wounded people often did. They focused on other things. Work, responsibilities, routine. Unfortunately, life had plans of its own. The first problem arrived on a rainy afternoon. Lucien returned from a meeting with several Northern Pack leaders wearing an expression Isolde had learned to distrust. The expression meant trouble. Not immediate danger, the kind capable of destroying lives without ever drawing blood. She found him in the study staring at several documents. His jaw looked unusually tight. What happened? For a moment he didn't answer. Then he handed her one of the reports. She read quickly and felt her stomach drop. The information wasn't entirely surprising. Perhaps that made it worse. Several influential southern nobles had begun questioning her presence in the north. Officially, they claimed concern for appearances. Unofficially, they were asking a far more dangerous question. Why was Commander Lucien Vesper sheltering the former mate of the king? The rumors had started quietly. Now they were spreading, predictably, cruelly, efficiently. Exactly the way court gossip always spread, like rot, like disease, like fire. Isolde lowered the paper. "I'm sorry," the words escaped automatically. Lucien looked up sharply. "For what?" "This." She gestured toward the reports. The rumors, the attention, the complications. A muscle shifted in his jaw. "You're apologizing for existing." "No." "Yes." The single word landed with startling force. The room fell silent, because both of them knew he was right. Yet years of blame had trained her instincts differently. Every problem became her responsibility. Every conflict somehow became her fault. The habit ran deep, dangerously deep. Lucien stood, crossed the room, stopped directly in front of her. "Look at me." She did, reluctantly. The intensity in his gaze stole the air from her lungs. "You are not a burden." The word sounded almost angry, not at her, at the idea itself, at everyone who had taught her otherwise. "You are not a mistake." His voice softened slightly. "You are not something that happened to me." Something tightened painfully in her chest, because nobody had ever defended her quite like this. For one impossible moment she couldn't speak, couldn't look away, couldn't breathe properly. The silence stretched, dangerously. Then someone knocked on the door. Both stepped back immediately, as though waking from something. The interruption felt absurdly frustrating, which was its own problem. The following week brought more rumors, more questions, more pressure. Several northern nobles expressed concern, not because they disliked Isolde. Most had grown remarkably fond of her, but politics remained politics, and politics cared little for affection. One evening, Lucien attended a gathering of regional alphas, a routine meeting, at least in theory. In practice, it became something else entirely, because one of the older alphas finally said aloud what others had only whispered. "If she remains here, you'll become a target." The statement settled heavily across the room. Lucien remained silent. The older wolf continued. "Southern factions already question your loyalty." No response. "They think you're choosing her over the crown." Still nothing. The alpha sighed. "Perhaps you should." That got everyone's attention, including Lucien's. "What?" The older wolf folded his arms. "You heard me." The room became very quiet. "She isn't the problem." The alpha's gaze sharpened. "Everyone can see what you refuse to admit." No one spoke. No one moved. Then the old wolf delivered the final blow. "You love her." Silence. Absolute, complete, devastating. Lucien said nothing, not because the accusation was wrong, because it wasn't. The realization had been stalking him for months, patiently, relentlessly, and now someone else had spoken it aloud, making denial impossible, making truth unavoidable. That night he returned home later than usual. The manor slept. Most lights were extinguished. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The world felt strangely still. He should have gone to bed. Instead, he found himself walking. Eventually, his feet carried him toward the library. A mistake, because Isolde was there, curled beside the fireplace with a book. Warm light danced across her features. She looked peaceful, safe, home. The realization hit harder than any battlefield injury ever had. Lucien stopped. For a moment he simply watched. Then she looked up and smiled. Everything became worse, because suddenly he understood exactly how much he loved her. Not because fate demanded it, not because she was beautiful, not because she needed saving. He loved her because she made every place brighter, because children trusted her, because she remembered names, because she carried kindness through pain instead of bitterness, because she deserved a life larger than suffering, and because somewhere along the way she had become the first person he thought about each morning, the first person he looked for in every room, the first person he wanted to protect from everything, including himself, dangerous, hopeless, entirely unavoidable. A few days later, disaster arrived. From the north itself, several powerful noble houses formally demanded Isolde's removal from Vesper territory. The petition spread rapidly. The argument remained political, on paper. In reality, it was personal, cowardly, cruel, and effective. The pressure landed squarely on Lucien. Choose stability or choose her. The choice infuriated him. But it existed, which meant consequences existed too. The news reached Isolde before he could explain it naturally. Rumors traveled faster than truth. She found the documents herself, read every word, and spent the rest of the day walking alone, thinking, remembering, hurting, because suddenly a terrible pattern emerged. Everywhere she went, trouble followed. The palace, the kingdom, now here, the place she loved, the people she loved. Lucien. By evening she had convinced herself of something devastating, that she was destroying his life. The conclusion wasn't true. But pain rarely cared about truth. It cared about fear, and fear was winning. The storm finally broke after midnight, not in the sky. Inside her, she went to him, found him alone in the training hall. The room stood empty except for the two of them. Moonlight spilled through high windows. The air smelled faintly of steel and rain. Lucien looked up as she entered, immediately sensing something wrong. "Isolde!" She stopped several feet away, hands trembling, heart racing. The words felt impossible. Yet she forced them out anyway because she believed she was protecting him. And love often made people do foolish things. "Then take me." The world stopped. Lucien stared. Not understanding, not wanting to understand, but understanding anyway. Her voice shook. "If claiming me publicly ends this—" "No," the answer came instantly, violently, like a blade. She flinched, but continued. "If becoming yours protects your position—" "No," again. Harder, closer. Lucien had already crossed half the room. His expression looked genuinely furious. Tears filled her eyes. "You could lose everything." "And?" The single word cracked like thunder. She stared, speechless. Lucien's chest rose and fell sharply. For the first time since she'd known him, restraint seemed genuinely difficult. "I would rather lose every title I possess." His voice shook, with feeling raw, uncontrolled, terrifying in its sincerity. "Then accept love offered as payment." The words shattered her completely because she finally understood. He wasn't protecting her out of obligation, or loyalty, or friendship. He never had been. And suddenly neither of them could pretend anymore. The truth stood between them, alive, breathing, unavoidable. Neither moved, neither looked away. And somewhere far to the south, a king woke from sleep, with the unmistakable sensation that something precious had just slipped beyond his reach forever. He didn't know why, didn't know what had happened, Only that for the first time since the rejection, fear truly found him. And it wasn't leaving. Chapter 8. The wolf who refused her body. For the rest of the night, neither of them slept. Not because of what had happened, because of what had been revealed. Some truths changed a conversation, others changed everything that came after it. This belonged to the second kind. The training hall remained silent long after the words stopped. Moonlight stretched across the wooden floor. Rain whispered softly against distant windows. Neither moved. Neither seemed entirely certain how to. Lucien stood several feet away, close enough to see the tears shining in her eyes. Far enough to maintain the last fragile piece of restraint he still possessed. The distance felt deliberate, necessary, painful. Isolde's heart wouldn't slow. His words continued echoing through her chest. I would rather lose every title I possess than accept love offered as payment. Nobody had ever spoken to her that way before. Not because the words were romantic, because they were respectful. Because he had looked at her and seen something worth protecting, even from herself, especially from herself. For years she had lived inside a world where affection carried conditions, expectations, transactions. Everything cost something, everything. Lucien had just shattered that belief in a single sentence. And somehow she didn't know what to do with the pieces. Finally she looked away. The intensity between them felt almost unbearable. I thought I was helping. Her voice sounded smaller than usual, more vulnerable. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, the anger had vanished, only sadness remained. I know. That somehow hurt more, because he understood exactly why she had offered. Sacrifice. The same instinct that had convinced her to endure years of loneliness beside Cassian. The same instinct that always placed other people before herself. The instinct that would eventually destroy her if nobody stopped it. Lucien stepped closer. Not enough to touch her, enough to be heard. You are allowed to matter too. The words landed quietly, yet something inside her cracked, a wound she hadn't realized existed. For a terrifying moment she almost cried, not from sadness, relief. The feeling shocked her, because relief should not hurt this much, yet somehow it did. Neither noticed the hours passing. Conversation came slowly after that. By the time dawn touched the eastern horizon, they had spoken about things neither usually discussed. Fear, regret, loss, dreams abandoned years ago, the pieces of themselves normally hidden from everyone else. And perhaps that intimacy was more dangerous than a kiss would have been, because physical attraction could be denied, understanding could not. When the first sunlight appeared, Isolde finally laughed softly. The sound surprised both of them. We've been awake all night. Lucien looked toward the windows. Apparently they had. Neither seemed to regret it. That realization created an entirely different problem. Over the following days, the atmosphere between them changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, at least not to outsiders. Yet everyone inside the manor noticed. Especially Anwen. Children possessed an alarming talent for detecting emotional shifts. The little girl spent 2 days observing them carefully, then arrived at a conclusion. One afternoon she marched into the kitchen and announced it to Edith. They're being weird. The older woman nearly dropped a spoon. Weird? Very weird. Edith wisely chose not to ask further questions. Anwen continued anyway. They keep looking at each other, a dangerous observation. People look at each other all the time. Not like this. The child folded her arms. They smile more. Edith decided silence was the safest response. Unfortunately, Anwen interpreted silence as encouragement. By evening, half the kitchen staff knew about the investigation. By the following morning, everyone was pretending not to know. Poorly, very poorly. Isolde sensed it first. People smiled differently. Conversations stopped whenever she entered rooms. Several servants looked suspiciously pleased. The entire situation felt increasingly suspicious. Lucien eventually noticed too. His response involved avoiding eye contact with everyone for most of a day. This accomplished nothing. The household simply found it amusing. For the first time in months, joy existed openly inside the manor. Not because of politics, not because of celebrations, because hope had arrived. And hope was contagious. Unfortunately, not everyone shared their happiness. Far to the south, Alpha King Cassian Thorne stood inside the royal archives, surrounded by ancient records. The engagement remained postponed, officially because of health concerns. Unofficially, because Cassian could no longer focus on anything long enough to complete preparations. The kingdom noticed. The council noticed. Celestine certainly noticed. No one understood why, least of all him. For weeks he had searched desperately for an explanation. Stress, exhaustion, pressure, none fit. Something felt wrong, fundamentally wrong. The sensation followed him constantly now. A persistent emptiness, an ache, a loss. Yet whenever he tried identifying its source, he found himself thinking about the same person, the same absence, the same pair of silver-grey eyes. It made no sense. He had rejected her. He had chosen a different future. The decision remained correct, logical, necessary. So why did everything feel broken? The answer arrived unexpectedly 3 days later, and it arrived in the form of an old woman. Archivist Helena had served the royal family longer than most nobles had been alive. Age had stolen little from her sharp mind, nothing from her bluntness. Cassian respected her, sometimes feared her. Both reactions were reasonable. She entered the archive carrying several ancient volumes, then immediately frowned. "You look terrible." The king blinked. Most people worked harder to disguise observations like that. Helena never bothered. "I've been tired. Tired doesn't explain this." She set the books down, studied him, then narrowed her eyes. Interesting. Cassian already disliked where this conversation seemed headed. "What is?" The old woman ignored the question. Instead, she asked one of her own. "Tell me something." He waited. "When was the last time you felt peace?" The answer should have been easy. It wasn't. Months, perhaps longer. The realization unsettled him, Helena noticed. Of course she did. "That's what I thought." Cassian folded his arms. "You seem unusually cryptic today." "Only because you're unusually blind." "Wonderful." The conversation improved rapidly. Helena opened one of the books. Ancient pages rustled softly. Faded ink covered most of the text. Records older than kingdoms, older than current laws, older than memory. "Do you know what ancient mate bonds were originally designed to do?" The question felt unrelated, which immediately made him suspicious. "No. Protect bloodlines." She turned another page. "Not create political alliances." Cassian frowned, still waiting. The old woman finally looked up. Her expression had become unusually serious. "When bonds are damaged improperly, consequences occur." The room grew still. For the first time, genuine unease moved through him. What kind of consequences? Helena held his gaze. The silence stretched. Then, "The bond doesn't always die." Something cold settled beneath his ribs. The archivist continued quietly. "Sometimes it fights." Cassian suddenly couldn't breathe properly. Because deep inside, some terrible part of him already knew she was right. Chapter 9. The King Who Came North. The news reached Vesper Manor shortly after sunrise. The king crossed the eastern pass before dawn. The words rippled through the north like wildfire. Lucien remained outwardly calm as the messenger delivered his report, but a familiar weight settled in his chest. Cassian Thorne was coming north with 30 riders, not an army, but a personal escort, which meant he intended to face them himself. Inside the manor, Isolde learned the news while helping Anwen organize her imaginary wolf army inside the library. "The king is coming north," Edith said quietly. The words struck harder than Isolde expected, not because she still loved Cassian, because old wounds remembered pain. Anwen looked up immediately. "The king?" "Yes." The child folded her arms. I still don't like him. Despite everything, the declaration almost made Edith smile. Almost. The rest of the day passed beneath a cloud of tension. Servants whispered. Warriors speculated. Children invented wild theories. By evening, Anwen had somehow concluded the king was coming to inspect deserts. No one knew why. Least of all, Anwen. That night, unable to sleep, Isolde slipped into the moonlit gardens and sat beside the fountain. Memories surfaced despite her efforts. Cassian laughing during summer hunts. Cassian stealing pastries. Cassian promising a future neither of them understood. The tragedy was never that he hadn't cared. It was that he had cared and still chosen something else. Footsteps approached. Lucien. He sat beside her without speaking. The silence felt natural now, comfortable. Are you afraid? He finally asked. Yes. What are you afraid of? She stared into the water. I'm afraid seeing him will remind me of who I used to be. What if it does? She looked at him. What if I become that person again? Lucien shook his head. You won't. How can you be sure? A faint smile touched his face. Because that woman doesn't exist anymore. The words struck deeper than she expected. You think your story is about being rejected, he said. It isn't. The night seemed to hold its breath. Your story is about everything that happened afterward. The healing, the rebuilding, the family she had found, the woman she had become. For months she had focused on surviving. Lucien had been paying attention to her growth all along. Neither acknowledged what lived beneath the conversation. Not yet. Eventually he stood. We should get some rest. Then he paused. Without looking back, he said quietly, No matter what happens tomorrow, you belong here. The words touched the oldest wound she carried. The fear of never truly belonging. When he disappeared into the manor, Isolde remained beneath the moonlight. Tomorrow she would face the man who had broken her heart. But she was no longer the woman who had left the capital, and perhaps that changed everything. Far to the south, Cassian rode steadily toward the north, toward the woman he had lost, toward the consequences of his choices. What he still didn't understand was that regret and redemption were not the same thing. Soon, he would learn the difference. Chapter 10. The choice she never had before. Cassian arrived shortly after noon. The entire territory seemed to hold its breath. Lucien waited in the courtyard as the convoy approached. When Cassian dismounted, the difference was immediately obvious. The king looked older, tired, worn down by something heavier than responsibility. Regret. The two men faced each other. Commander, Your Majesty, formal, controlled, dangerously polite. You've protected her, Cassian said. She protected herself. Pain flickered briefly across the king's face. May I see her? Lucien's jaw tightened. That's her choice. Cassian nodded slowly. Perhaps for the first time he truly understood the difference between obedience and respect. Inside the manor, Isolde watched from a window. Months ago this moment would have shattered her. Now it only unsettled her. Edith entered quietly. He wants to see you. After months of imagining this moment, Isolde had discovered she felt something unexpected. I'll go. Cassian waited in the east garden beneath a flowering tree. For a long moment, neither spoke. Years of history stood between them. Hello, Isolde. Hello, Cassian. The conversation felt impossibly difficult. You look well, he said. I'm happy here. The words slipped out before she could soften them. Cassian flinched. Happy here, not with him. Not because of him, here. He looked toward the mountains, toward the life she'd built without him. I spent months trying to understand what happened, he admitted. At first I blamed politics, then stress, then everyone except myself. His gaze met hers. I was wrong. I know pain crossed his face. I loved the crown more than I loved you. Hearing it spoken aloud hurt less than she expected. Perhaps because she had already mourned it. I thought I could have both, he continued. I convinced myself I was protecting the kingdom. In reality, I was protecting myself. Silence settled between them. Then Isolde spoke. Do you know what hurt the most? Cassian looked at her immediately. It wasn't losing you. His expression tightened. It was believing I wasn't worth choosing. Years of self-doubt lived inside those words. Cassian closed his eyes. For the first time, he truly understood the damage he had caused. I never thought that, he whispered. Not once. She believed him. And somehow that made everything sadder, because he had loved her, just not enough when it mattered. If I could undo it. You can't. The answer wasn't cruel. Only true. Some wounds healed, but they never unhappened. After a long silence, Cassian finally asked the question that had brought him across an entire kingdom. Is there any chance for us? The world narrowed. Months ago she would have answered immediately. Now she searched her heart and found someone else there. Someone patient, steady, safe. Lucien. The realization arrived with absolute clarity. Cassian saw it happen, saw the answer before she spoke, and in that moment, his heart broke. The words never needed to be said. He already knew. Somewhere else on the manor grounds, Lucien stared toward the mountains, unaware that Isolde had finally discovered the truth of her own heart. Chapter 11. The Bloodline Beneath the Moon. Cassian remained in the north, not because he still hoped to win Isolde back. That hope had died in the garden. He stayed because unanswered questions remained, and because his instincts warned that something larger was coming. The warning proved correct. 2 nights later, a messenger arrived from the capital carrying a sealed report. Cassian read it during dinner. By the time he finished, all color had vanished from his face. The Royal Archives found something, he said. The room fell silent. Something connected to ancient bloodlines. His gaze settled on Isolde. Your mother's family. That's impossible. Cassian slid the report across the table. Apparently not. As Isolde read, confusion turned to shock, then fear. According to centuries-old records, her mother's family descended from the Lunaris bloodline, an ancient royal lineage believed extinct. Not destroyed, hidden, protected, forgotten, until now. This has to be wrong. The archivists verified everything, Cassian said quietly. The revelation stunned everyone, especially Isolde. For the first time in her life, people wanted something from her, not because of who she loved or who had rejected her, because of who she was. Within days, rumors spread across kingdoms. Letters flooded the manor. Offers, threats, marriage proposals. Lucien personally burned those. The activity seemed oddly therapeutic. Soon ambassadors and powerful alphas began arriving. Everyone wanted the last known descendant of the Lunaris bloodline. The attention felt less like admiration and more like hunger. One evening, Isolde stood alone on a balcony overlooking the valley. Lucien joined her. You haven't slept. No, you should. I know. A smile briefly appeared. You sound exactly like Anwen. She laughed. The sound felt precious. Then his expression softened. You don't have to become what they want. The words settled deep inside. Everyone else spoke about bloodlines and politics. Lucien worried only about her. What if I don't know what I want? Then take your time. The simplicity nearly broke her. Everyone demanded answers. Lucien offered patience. As sunset painted the mountains gold, a sudden chill raced through her. Sharp, wrong. She froze. What is it? Lucien asked. The sensation vanished, but unease remained. I don't know. Deep inside, instinct whispered a warning. Something was coming. Far below the manor, hidden among the pines, another wolf felt the same thing. The assassin lowered his spyglass. The manor stood illuminated in the distance. His smile held no kindness. Powerful people had paid extremely well for this assignment. One woman, alive if possible, dead if necessary. Nearby waited 20 experienced killers. Above them, storm clouds gathered across the night sky. By dawn, Vesper Manor would no longer be safe. Chapter 12. Fire in the Manor. The storm arrived just after midnight. Rain lashed the northern mountain. Thunder rolled through the valleys. Most of Vesper Manor slept through it. The attack began 43 minutes later. A guard died silently in the darkness. Then shadows slipped across the grounds, professional, disciplined, heavily funded. For 6 minutes, the manor remained unaware. Then a warning howl shattered the night. Attack! The sound echoed across the territory. Lucien was awake before he fully understood why. Years of battle had trained his instincts. His door burst open. "We're breached," Gregor said. "Numbers? Unknown." Another howl echoed through the storm. Lucien's expression hardened. They came for her. Neither man needed to say whose name he meant. Across the manor, Isolde woke to shouting steel and the unmistakable sounds of wolves shifting. Fear struck instantly. Anwen! She ran through crowded corridors until she reached the child's room. Empty. For one horrifying heartbeat, her world stopped. Then a small voice called from beneath the bed. "I'm here." Relief nearly buckled her knees. Anwen emerged, clutching a stuffed wolf. "They're fighting." "I know." The child hesitated. "Are we dying?" "No." The answer came instantly, firmly, even if Isolde couldn't be certain. She took Anwen's hand and hurried toward the lower levels as chaos spread through the manor. Outside, Lucien fought through waves of attackers. Too many, far too many. This wasn't an assassination attempt. It was a military operation. Someone had invested heavily in obtaining Isolde. Lightning illuminated bodies, steel, mud, and blood. Then Lucien saw it. The attackers weren't trying to win, they were trying to reach the manor. Trying to reach her. With a furious shift, he transformed into his massive silver-black wolf form and crashed into the enemy ranks. The battlefield exploded into violence. Then another wolf joined the fight. Larger, deadlier. Cassian. The king tore through assassins with terrifying efficiency. The attackers had prepared for Lucien. They had not prepared for both alphas. For the first time, the enemy line faltered. Through the storm, Lucien and Cassian locked eyes. No words were needed. Protect the manor. Protect Isolde. Everything else came later. Then the enemy began withdrawing, not retreating. Repositioning. Lucien's instinct screamed, "Trap!" The explosion came a second later. Fire erupted along the eastern wall, windows shattered, stone cracked. Screams echoed through the night. The attackers had brought explosives. The realization horrified everyone. Inside the manor, panic spread instantly. Smoke filled hallways, children cried, warriors rushed toward damaged sections. Exactly as intended. Confusion, chaos, opportunity. Anwen clung tightly to Isolde's hand as smoke drifted through the lower corridors. A soot-covered guard appeared. "We need to move." "What happened?" The east wing collapsed. His voice shook. "We're evacuating." The words chilled her. The attack was succeeding. Outside, Cassian looked toward the burning wall and suddenly understood. The attackers weren't trying to kill Isolde. They were trying to take her, alive, which meant somewhere inside the chaos, a second team was already moving. Lucien reached the same conclusion at the exact same moment. Both alphas turned toward the manor and ran. Because somewhere inside that burning building was the woman they loved. And they were already late. Chapter 13. The Child They Stole. Lucien reached the manor first. Smoke rolled through the eastern wing. Flames spread through shattered corridors. His instincts searched for one person. Isolde. He found her near the lower levels. Relief struck hard. Then he saw her face. Terrified, not frightened, terrified. Isolde. Her eyes found him. "Anwen." His heart dropped. "Where is she?" Tears filled her eyes. "We were evacuating. There was smoke. People were running." Cassian arrived seconds later. One look told him everything. What's wrong? Lucien never looked away from Isolde Anwen's missing silence. Terrible. Heavy. Because all three of them immediately understood what it meant. The attackers had succeeded. Someone had taken the child. Lucien became frighteningly calm. Tell me exactly what happened, Isolde forced herself to remember. We were moving toward the tunnels. Then smoke filled the corridor. She swallowed. I lost sight of her for 1 second. 1 second. That was all it had taken. The guilt was already destroying her. But Lucien understood immediately. Professional kidnappers relied on moments exactly like that. Confusion, crowds, fear. This had been planned, carefully, cruelly. Cassian pieced it together at the same time. The attack, the fire, the explosives, the confusion, all of it had been a distraction. The real target had never been Isolde. It had been Anwen, a hostage. The realization filled him with fury. Nearby, Isolde finally broke. Months of healing vanished beneath one devastating truth. The child she loved was gone, and she had been holding her hand moments before Lucien stepped forward immediately. His hand settled on her shoulders. Steady, grounding, present. It's not your fault, she shook her head. It happened so fast, I should have... No. The force in his voice stunned her. You should not have needed to defend a child from trained assassins. Silence followed. Because he was right, and because grief never listened to reason. For a long moment she simply cried, trying not to imagine Anwen frightened and alone. Then Lucien looked toward the night, toward the wolves responsible. We're getting her back. Not reassurance, a promise. Cassian stepped forward. Agreed. The two alphas exchanged a glance. Months of tension vanished instantly. A child had been taken. Nothing else mattered. Search parties formed immediately. Trackers spread across the territory. Captured assassins were questioned. By dawn, information finally emerged. A route, a destination. Old ruins hidden deep in the eastern mountains. The moment the report arrived, Lucien prepared to leave. Cassian joined him without hesitation. Some missions required warriors. This one required fathers. As riders gathered in the courtyard, Isolde appeared, pale, exhausted, determined. I'm coming. No. The answer left Lucien instantly. They took her because of me. The guilt returned with full force. If I stay here, you stay here because we need someone to come home to... Silence followed. Cassian suddenly found the horizon fascinating. Several warriors copied him. Lucien regretted nothing. For a moment the world narrowed to the look passing between him and Isolde. Then reality returned. Anwen remained missing. The mission remained ahead. Lucien stepped closer. His voice softened. We'll bring her back. The promise carried everything he couldn't say, everything he wasn't ready to say. Not yet. After a long moment she nodded. The riders mounted. Dawn spread gold across distant mountains. Somewhere beyond them, Anwen was waiting, trusting someone would come. Lucien intended to prove her right. As the search party disappeared into the growing light, Isolde stood alone in the courtyard. Her heart ached, her hands trembled, and for the first time since Anwen vanished, she realized something terrifying. It wasn't only the child she feared losing, it was Lucien too. And that frightened her more than anything. Chapter 14. The Wolf She Chose. The ruins lay deep within the eastern mountains, hidden beneath centuries of forest and stone. From a ridge overlooking the valley, Lucien studied the fortress below. Guards, lookouts, enough enemies to be dangerous. Beside him, Cassian lowered his spyglass. They expected pursuit. Of course they did. Someone wanted leverage. Someone wanted Isolde. Unfortunately for the kidnappers, they had taken the wrong hostage. Now, two alphas, who should have been rivals, were hunting them together. A scout emerged from the trees. North entrance, lightly defended. And Anwen? The scout pointed toward the center of the ruins. Relief hit instantly. Alive. That was enough. The assault began moments later. Fast, silent, merciless. The defenders expected negotiations, instead they got war. By the time alarms sounded, Lucien was already inside. Then he heard it, a small voice, frightened, brave, Anwen. He followed the sound through crumbling corridors until he found her bound inside a stone chamber. The moment she saw him, everything changed. "Lucien!" He dropped beside her and cut the ropes. Anwen threw herself into his arms. For several seconds neither moved. Then she whispered, "I knew you'd come." The words hit harder than any blade. "We're taking you home." She nodded immediately, as though there had never been another possible outcome. A crash echoed through the fortress. The battle wasn't over. Lucien lifted her and turned toward the exit. 3 wolves blocked the doorway. The kidnapper leader stood among them, scarred, confident, smiling. "You should have negotiated. Move." The fight ended quickly. The first wolf fell, then the second, then the third. Only the leader remained. He smiled, then lunged. Not at Lucien, at Anwen. Everything happened at once. Lucien moved, steel flashed, pain exploded through his side. The blade struck deep, far too deep. The kidnapper died seconds later, but the damage remained. Blood soaked through Lucien's clothes. Anwen's face went white. "Lucien?" He forced a smile. "Still here." Cassian arrived moments later and immediately understood. "The blood, the wound, the child. We need to move." Lucien agreed. Standing was becoming difficult. The world felt distant, unsteady, not ideal. Anwen refused to release his hand for the entire journey home. Hours later, Vesper Manor erupted into chaos when they arrived. The rescue should have been triumphant. Instead, Lucien nearly collapsed while dismounting. Healers rushed forward. Warriors shouted. Anwen burst into tears, and Isolde reached the courtyard just in time to see the blood, so much blood. The world narrowed. Only Lucien remained. Alive, but barely. Anwen ran into her arms, sobbing. "We found him." Relief and terror collided inside her. She held the child tightly, yet her eyes never left Lucien. Fear cut through her with brutal clarity, and for the first time she stopped running from the truth. She loved him. The possibility of losing him felt unbearable. The manor waited through endless hours. Nobody slept. Nobody relaxed. Even Cassian remained, watching, understanding. Finally, shortly after midnight, a healer emerged. "He's going to live." The relief that swept through the manor was almost physical. Moments later, Isolde entered Lucien's room. He looked exhausted, pale, weak, alive. His eyes opened. A faint smile appeared. "We got her back." The words shattered her final defenses. She crossed the room, took his hand, and spoke the truth. "I love you." Silence filled the room. Lucien stared, certain he had imagined it. Then she said it again, stronger, clearer. "I love you." Tears filled her eyes. "I think I've loved you for a long time." For several seconds he simply looked at her. Then the carefully controlled commander finally broke. And when he smiled, it looked like sunlight after a lifetime of winter. Outside the room, Cassian stood quietly in the corridor. He had heard enough, and for the first time he truly understood. She hadn't chosen Lucien because Cassian failed. She chose him because she loved him. The realization broke his heart. But it also brought peace. Tomorrow he would make the hardest choice of his life. Chapter 15. The Kingdom That Chose Her. The morning after Lucien woke, the manor felt different. Anwen was home. Lucien was alive. And the truth no longer needed hiding. Naturally, Anwen noticed first. She studied Lucien. Then Isolde. Then Lucien again. Finally she pointed. "You smiled." "I do that occasionally." "No, different." Lucien immediately regretted surviving. Across the room Isolde laughed, which only strengthened Anwen's argument. Aha! For the first time in months, joy felt easy. Unfortunately, kingdoms rarely allowed peace to last. Within days, nobles, ambassadors, alphas, and envoys began arriving. Everyone wanted the same thing: Isolde, or rather what she represented, the last known descendant of the Lunaris bloodline. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years longing to be seen. Now entire kingdoms suddenly wanted her attention, and she discovered she no longer cared. Recognition wasn't love. Power wasn't belonging. Status wasn't home. Those lessons had cost her too much. The largest gathering came 10 days after the rescue. Representatives from multiple territories filled the great hall. Offers followed: land, titles, influence, positions, promises. One by one, Isolde declined them all. Confusion spread through the room. An elderly alpha frowned. "Do you understand the opportunities being offered?" "Yes." "And you refuse them?" "I do." "Why?" Silence settled across the hall. Then Isolde answered, "I spent most of my life believing that if I loved enough, sacrificed enough, and worked hard enough, someone would eventually decide I was worthy." The room became very still. "I thought acceptance came from other people." Her voice remained calm, certain. "I was wrong." Something shifted throughout the hall. "I don't need titles to have value." She glanced toward the mountains, toward the life she'd built. "I don't need power to matter." Then toward Anwen. "I don't need kingdoms to choose me." The words carried no bitterness, only freedom. One by one, wolves rose to their feet. Then all at once, applause filled the hall. Not obligation, respect. Across the room, Lucien watched with quiet pride. She deserved every moment. Then Cassian stepped forward. The hall gradually fell silent. "There was a time when I failed this woman." Shock rippled through the gathering, yet Cassian continued, "Not because she lacked worth, because I lacked wisdom." The room listened. "I spent years believing strength meant holding power." His gaze found Isolde. "I eventually learned that true strength often looks like kindness." Emotion tightened throats throughout the hall. The king inclined his head, a gesture of genuine respect. Then he spoke the words Isolde had once needed more than anything. "The kingdom is fortunate to have you." Nothing else needed saying. That night the gathering ended. The representatives departed. Peace settled over the north. Not perfect peace. Earned peace, built through survival, healing, and love. Later, beneath the stars, Lucien found Isolde in the gardens. For a while neither spoke. Then he quietly asked, "Stay." One word, one choice, freely offered, and for the first time in her life Isolde smiled before answering, because the answer had lived inside her heart for a very long time. Chapter 16. Love Stronger Than Destiny. Moonlight bathed the gardens. A soft wind moved through the valley. Lucien stood beside her, waiting, not demanding, simply waiting the way he always had. And suddenly Isolde understood. The greatest love of her life had never arrived like a storm. It had arrived like shelter. Patient, steady, certain. The kind of love that stayed. Tears gathered unexpectedly. Lucien softened immediately. "You don't have to answer now." A shaky laugh escaped her. "That's exactly why the answer is yes." For a heartbeat he simply stared. Then hope finally reached him. His eyes closed briefly. Not victory, relief. The relief of a man who had carried something precious for so long, he forgot what it felt like to put it down. When he looked at her again, the honesty in his eyes stole her breath. She stepped closer, then closer, until only inches remained. Lucien lifted a hand, giving her every chance to walk away. She leaned into his touch instead, and when he kissed her, it felt nothing like the love she once thought she wanted. There was no fear, no uncertainty, only home. For a long time they stood beneath the stars, talking, laughing, and dreaming about the future. For the first time, the future felt possible. The next morning, Anwen somehow discovered everything. No one knew how. The child marched into breakfast triumphantly. "I knew it," Edith nearly choked. Gregor lost all dignity. Anwen pointed dramatically at Lucien. "You took forever." Lucien looked genuinely defeated. Isolde laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. The sound filled the room with warmth, and everyone seemed relieved to hear it. Weeks became months. Summer arrived, then autumn, then winter. Life moved forward. Not perfectly, beautifully. Before returning south, Cassian met Isolde one final time. "You look happy," he said. "I am," he nodded. "I know." After a long silence, he smiled. "I used to think losing you was the worst thing that could happen." His gaze drifted toward the mountains. "Now I think losing myself would have been worse." Isolde understood. Growth often arrived through pain. "That's something every king should learn," Cassian said. "What?" His smile deepened. "People aren't possessions." The honesty made them both laugh, and somehow it became the perfect ending to their story. Not lovers, not enemies, simply two people who had survived each other and become better because of it. When he left, there was no heartbreak, only peace. Winter eventually settled over the north. Snow covered the mountains, the manor filled with music, laughter, and life. One evening, Lucien found Isolde watching snowfall through a window. She leaned against him automatically. Outside, snow drifted softly through the darkness. Inside, warmth surrounded them. Lucien glanced toward Anwen, organizing yet another completely unnecessary wolf army. Toward their friends, their family, their home, everything they had built, everything they had saved. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Isolde looked at him, then at the life around them, and smiled. None, because every wound had led her here. Not because suffering was necessary, because she had survived it. And in surviving, she discovered her own worth. No crown had given her that. No kingdom had granted it. She found it herself. Only then had love become possible. Real love. The kind that chose her freely. The kind she chose in return. History would remember her bloodline. Songs would remember her courage. But her greatest achievement was far simpler. She built a family from the ruins of heartbreak. And that family became stronger than destiny itself.